I spent 11 years making another person's dreams fit like a tailored suit. Now I stood in a courtroom to that same person telling a judge I wasn't good enough to keep the roof I paid for.
She sold her sewing machine, the one that built her business, to pay for his final year of law school. Years later, in front of a judge, he called her an embarrassment to his image. What he didn't count on was the ledger she'd kept of every sacrifice, every dollar, every night she went without. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Denise ran a small alterations shop on the edge of downtown, the kind of place regulars trusted with wedding dresses and funeral suits alike. She was known for two things: her stitching and her stubborn habit of extending credit to anyone who asked nicely enough. "You're going to run this place into the ground with your soft heart," her supplier, Warren, told her one morning, setting down a bolt of navy wool. He ran the fabric and notions counter 2 doors down and had been feeding her business scraps and patience in equal measure for 6 years. "My soft heart pays your invoices eventually," Denise said, not looking up from her machine. "Eventually isn't a due date. Neither is your complaining." He laughed and left the invoice on the counter anyway, same as always. That was the rhythm of her days, steady, tight, held together by her own hands. And every evening when the shop closed, she went home to Marcus. Marcus Whitfield had been in his 2nd year of law school when they married, full of plans and empty of funds. Denise had believed in those plans before she'd believed in almost anything. She emptied her savings for his bar exam fees. She took an extra alterations work at midnight so he could study in silence. When his laptop broke during finals week, she sold the engagement ring's matching wedding band, the one with the small diamond insert, and told him it was at the jeweler for cleaning. "I don't know what I'd do without you," he told her the night he passed the bar. He held her face in his hands like she was the only fixed point in a spinning world. She believed him. Success, when it finally came for Marcus, didn't arrive all at once. It arrived in small adjustments, the way a hem gets taken in a 1/4 inch at a time until the whole garment feels different. First, it was small comments. "You don't have to mention the shop every time someone asks what you do," he said after a dinner with his new colleagues. "It makes it sound bigger than it is when you call it my business. It's a stall with a sewing machine, Denise." She'd laughed it off. Then she stopped correcting him when he introduced her, at a firm mixer, as someone who helps out with the books instead of his wife. There were smaller moments, too, the kind that don't sound like much until you stack enough of them together. At a dinner party thrown by one of the senior partners, Marcus spent 20 minutes describing his trial strategy to a circle of admiring colleagues, while Denise stood a few feet away holding 2 drinks, waiting for a pause in the conversation that never quite arrived. When she finally set both glasses down and excused herself to the restroom, no one seemed to notice she'd left. On the drive home, she mentioned it lightly, testing the water. "I felt a little invisible tonight." Marcus told her she was reading too much into a party. She let it go, the way she'd let go of a dozen smaller things before it, each one small enough to seem unreasonable to mention on its own. His mother, Faye, made her opinions known more directly. Faye had lost her own dress shop decades earlier, back when Marcus's father convinced her to sink her savings into his failing construction business. She never spoke about it directly, but she watched Denise with a particular kind of vigilance, as if she were watching a rerun of her own life and couldn't decide whether to warn the woman or resent her for being in it. "A lawyer's wife should carry herself a certain way," Faye said one Sunday, eyeing Denise's calloused fingers over dinner. "Image matters more than people admit." "The shop is honest work, Faye." "I never said it wasn't honest. I said it isn't useful to him anymore." Denise said nothing. She'd learned, by then, that Faye's sentences were built to leave no comfortable response. Marcus didn't defend her. He also didn't agree out loud. He simply let the silence sit there, and Denise began to understand that his silence was its own kind of answer. At the firm, Marcus found himself paired on a high-profile case with Renata Cole, a partner-track attorney with a reputation for precision and polish. She corrected his memos with a red pen and a compliment in the same sentence. She introduced him to judges at receptions Denise, was never invited to. People meet your presentation before they meet your talent, Renata told him once, adjusting his collar before a bar association dinner. Rooms like this aren't entered with noise. They're entered with preparation. He started coming home later. He started asking Denise not to visit the office. Clients get confused, he said, though no client had ever asked who she was. One afternoon, Denise decided to surprise him with lunch anyway, driving 30 minutes with a container of his favorite chicken and rice balanced on the passenger seat. When she arrived, a colleague at the front desk assumed she was a delivery driver. Marcus didn't correct her either. He simply took the container, thanked her quickly, and asked her, quietly, urgently, not to come by again without calling first. She sat in her car afterward for a long time before she could make herself drive home. Renata, for her part, never said anything unkind to Denise directly. The two women had only met once, briefly, at a holiday function where Renata had complimented Denise's coat with the polite detachment of someone cataloging an unfamiliar object. But she had a way of positioning herself in Marcus's orbit that Denise noticed even when she couldn't name it. The hand briefly on his arm during a toast, the inside jokes about cases Denise had never heard the details of, the easy assumption that she, and not Denise, belonged in the rooms Marcus was now moving through. Denise told herself she was imagining things. She told herself that more than once. That night, she asked him plainly why he hadn't introduced her as his wife. "You're making a small thing large," he said. "When you had no shoes fit for an interview, was I a small thing?" He didn't answer that either. Faye's judgment sharpened into open pressure. A lawyer's wife shouldn't be seen with pins in her mouth and thread on her sleeves, she told Denise one evening, loud enough for Marcus to hear from the next room and say nothing. Denise began closing the shop earlier. She began softening her voice, trimming her sentences, dressing for a version of herself she didn't recognize. Warren noticed before anyone else did. "You've gotten quiet," he said, setting down a delivery one morning. "I'm just tired." "You're always tired. That's usually the tell, not the excuse." She managed a small smile and changed the subject, the way she always did with him, grateful for his steadiness, careful never to lean on it too visibly. Marcus had already begun accusing her, in vague and pointed comments, of being too comfortable around her supplier. She didn't want to give the accusation any more fuel than it already had. The freezer unit that kept her fabric dyeing supplies cool broke down 1 week later, a small disaster that could have cost her a full order, and Warren was the one who dropped everything to help her fix it. When Marcus found out, he didn't ask what happened. He only asked why Warren had been the one to show up. 3 weeks later, a process server found her at the shop. "Are you Denise Whitfield?" "I am." "This is for you." She read it standing at her own counter, Warren's delivery truck still idling outside. Marcus was filing for divorce. He was also asking the court to award him the house, the one she had made the down payment on with money from selling her original sewing machine, because his name was the only one on the newer refinancing paperwork. And buried in the filing, in careful legal language, was an accusation that her inappropriate closeness with a business associate had caused the breakdown of the marriage. He had already signed a lease on a new, polished townhouse across town. Denise didn't cry in front of the lawyer she eventually hired, an older attorney named Harold Priest, who had once received a favor from her in the form of altered suits, done for free, back when he was a struggling public defender. "I don't have much money for this," she told him. "You didn't ask me to price justice when I needed a suit that made me look like I belonged in a courtroom," Harold said. "Let me return the favor." Together, they built the case out of what Denise had kept without realizing she was building a defense. Bank transfers to law school registration offices. A message from Marcus, sent during his final semester. "If I miss this payment, everything falls apart. I don't know what I'd do without you," that she'd never deleted. Receipts for the ring she'd sold. A record, kept by Warren's supply business, of every piece of fabric and material extended to her on credit during the years she was funding 2 households out of 1 income. "None of this proves I didn't do something wrong," she told Harold. "It doesn't need to prove that," he said. "It needs to prove what you actually did, in your own words and paper, instead of what he's decided to call it." Building the file took the better part of 2 weeks. Denise sat at her kitchen table most nights after closing the shop, sorting through years of bank statements, old text threads, and a spiral notebook she'd kept out of habit more than strategy. The kind of notebook a person keeps when they don't yet know they'll need it as evidence one day. Harold cross-referenced dates against Marcus's tuition deadlines, against the timeline of the ring's sale at a local pawn shop, against the receipts from Warren's supply business showing months of extended credit during the exact stretch when Marcus's bar exam fees had come due. Each document on its own looked unremarkable. Laid side by side, in order, they told a story no cross-examination could easily undo. The hearing did not go the way Marcus expected. His attorney painted Denise's sacrifices as ordinary marital support and reduced her business to a footnote. Then Harold introduced the message Marcus had sent, the one admitting he didn't know what he'd do without her. "A man who wrote those words," Harold said, "cannot now stand before this court and call the same woman an embarrassment because he's wearing a better suit." Faye, unexpectedly, was the one who cracked the case wide open, not intentionally. Under gentle cross-examination about the timeline of the couple's finances, she admitted, almost as an aside, that she had encouraged Marcus to distance himself from anything that reminded people where he came from, including, specifically, Denise's shop. It wasn't proof of an affair. It was proof of a pattern, a mother teaching a son to be ashamed of the woman funding his rise, and a son following the lesson all the way to a courtroom. The judge did not find evidence of any improper relationship between Denise and Warren. The judge did find, in plain and unambiguous language, that Denise's financial and domestic contributions to the marriage were substantial, continuous, and directly tied to Marcus's education and career. The house stayed with her. Marcus, for his part, did not get the clean image he'd been chasing. Renata Cole, who had begun seeing him socially once the divorce filing became public, quietly ended things after sitting through part of the hearing herself. "I don't understand men who need a woman to disappear so they can feel tall," she reportedly told a mutual colleague afterward. She never worked with Marcus again. Denise reopened her shop under its original name 3 months later, with a new sign and, for the first time in years, her own uncalloused confidence. Regulars who had drifted away during the worst of the divorce gossip started trickling back, some sheepish, some simply relieved to see the lights on again. She didn't ask where anyone had been. She just took their measurements and let the work speak for itself, the way it always had. Warren still delivered fabric on Tuesdays. He never asked for more than her friendship, and she never offered less than her honesty. "You waited a long time," she told him once, months after the verdict, watching him unload a bolt of deep green wool. "I wasn't waiting for your marriage to end," he said. "I was hoping you'd remember yourself before there was nothing left to remember." She didn't answer that with a promise. She answered it eventually, with time, walking beside him slowly, without needing to rush toward anything. Faye came by the shop once too, unannounced, standing near the door the way people stand when they've rehearsed an apology and lost their nerve halfway through it. She didn't offer one, not fully. She only said that she hoped the shop was doing well and left before Denise could decide how to respond. Denise watched her go and felt, for the first time in a long while, something closer to pity than anger. The recognition of an old wound dressed up as advice, passed from one generation to the next like a family heirloom nobody wanted, but nobody knew how to refuse. Marcus came by once, months later, standing outside her shop window the way a stranger might. He didn't come in. Denise didn't need him to. If you loved this story, you'll want to see what happens when Faye, the mother-in-law who lost everything once before, finally comes face to face with the daughter-in-law she tried to shrink. That's coming in part 2. Hit subscribe, turn on your notifications, and we'll see you in the next one.